Rose, thank you for that reflection. It couldn't be a better segue, actually, into what our presenters will be talking about, because it clearly underscores that the system is not working, and the inequities in our system, that even in the most supposedly progressive country, here we are with 20% of the people not having any access to water, something that we think is only true way off in Africa or somewhere like that. So I appreciate very much the segue you gave us, that reflection, and agree with Carol Francis that we need to post that. But today it's my privilege then to introduce you to Lee Van Ham and to Angelica Juarez, who have both been working on this issue of another world is possible. I had met Lee several years ago, many years, maybe more than a decade ago, when he brought a speaker to the Center for Religion and Civic Culture at USC, but had lost touch. And 3 or so years ago, a former student of mine, we connected by Facebook, and lo and behold, he was in Mexico and married to Angelica Juarez. And he told me, you need to come and see what's happening here. Eventually, I was able to go, and I started a conversation with Lee and started to get to know the whole issue of Jubilee circles and Jubilee economics, and thinking a lot about the fact that the Zapatistas in Mexico have decided, it's an indigenous group, in case you all don't remember, that another world is possible, and they've set it up in Mexico. And Jubilee Economics has been working with them in the area San Cristobal de las Casas and are forging a new path. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Lee Van Ham and Angelica Juarez de Swanson, who will take us forward to think about other options in the world than the structure that keeps these inequities going deeper and deeper. All right, Lee, take it away.
Thank you, Grace. Well, this is an amazing group of people. As I listen to all of the introductions, I feel a lot of collegiality on issues and themes. Perhaps in what I have to say here, we will be able to talk about economics in a way that is helpful. That would be my hope. I imagine that's your hope too, or why would you be here? So I think often of myself as working at the intersection of economics, ecology, and spirituality. And that happened when I had a real repositioning of my call to ministry, which had been in the Presbyterian Church for 32 years. And that repositioning happened when I had 2 cancers in 1996. And in that place, in that space of depression that I was in, I heard very clearly an inner voice that told me it was time to go after some things I'd been putting off for a long time. So I resigned being a pastor and working in a church, and ended up meeting, as I met with I was in a group, Juanita and I, my wife and I were in a group of people influenced by Latin America. And I'm sorry, I was distracted by one of our cats who's scratching on furniture, which is a no-no. And so, yeah, at that point, I was introduced to the manuscript of The Biblical Jubilee and the Struggle for Life, which you may know of, the book by Ross and Gloria Kinsler. And happy to say, by the way, that Whitfenstock is reprinting this. It's been out of print for some time. Orbis originally printed it 21 years ago, but it's coming out again now. I think later this year it'll be out. Okay, so as we look at what I want to do today, let me just say that this is an outline. I'll talk a little bit about the language I'm using. I'll talk about the rise and fall of an economic system, a Jubilee economy, and faith-based action. And Angelica, just to give you a heads up, I want you to be the lead off there on the faith-based action. And so let's see, let me get rid of this screen again and get back to Zoom. There I am. I guess you saw me all along, but I just wanted to get back there. So the language I'm using, just because I'm not sure, I'm sure we all have different languages. So the title of this is Our Exodus from Superpower to Creation Economics. Now, I'm not sure that every religious tradition I heard introduced here has an Exodus story, but it's certainly strong in some religious traditions. And so we need to exit the superpower economics and move toward creation economics. I'm not sure if that language really connects for you, but yeah, the superpower economics is a growth economics, and creation economics measures well-being. It doesn't worry about endless unfettered growth, which of course destroys creation. So these two economic models are a long ways apart, and we need to, since we live in a superpower, unraveling superpower, I think would be the right way to say it, we have a great need to lead an exodus in our faith communities from this way of modeling life and structuring life and the economy that goes with it. Global growth economy, I mean, it's really quite insane and illusionary to hear talk about going back to normal and getting the economy growing again. We have an opportunity right now to move away from a growth measured economy to using a different set of measurements, but it still has not captured the media or the primary way of talking in our culture. That, I mean, people will say, well, you can't have unfettered growth on a limited planet, but moving from that to actually changing how we measure the economy seems to be an enormous step, or perhaps many little ones. And of course, we have lots of people that are clinging to what's past, a deep desire to return to quote unquote normal, which when you analyze it makes very little sense. But nonetheless, that's what a huge narrative is urging. And we need to redistribute resources. And it's really very interesting that in the tax cut that we had just a couple of years ago, enormous amounts of wealth were redistributed, but it was redistributed upward. And so we're good all the time in our culture with redistributing wealth. It's just when we start redistributing it downward that we start hearing, oh, that's socialism, and all kinds of panicky terms like that, like we're doing something terrible. Well, in the context of all that, I want to make sure that we look at the opportunity in this moment for people of faith to really give a startling witness to the transformation that's needed. And then to say this, that the decade of the 2020s is critical. We're all familiar with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that has said by 2030, we really have to make enormous changes, or major regions of the planet will become less and less habitable by human people and other species. So the stress on creation is enormous, and all of us who have a theology and practice of creation care, and however we talk about it, I relate to that, and we feel a great responsibility to be in partnership with the Creator and creation in that. So that much about language. I want to move then to the rise and fall of an economic system. And in that regard, I want to introduce C.S. Holling, the ecological economist, still living, but about 90 years old now, I think. And I want to say a word about ecological economists. An environmental economist does economics with a concern for the environment, but an ecological economist does economics with the understanding that the economy is a subset of ecology. Not ever can economics be dictating to ecology how to arrange itself, but always the ecology dictates, well, more shares and cooperates, dictates not the right word for how that happens, but shares, with human beings and all beings, how an economy should be created. So who's he? Okay, Nafiz Ahmed, who's a fellow at the Schumacher Institute for Sustainable Systems. And he had an article recently in The Light at the End, which is in Yes Magazine, the summer 2020. Some of you, I hope, get that magazine. I find it enormously useful in terms of the way it focuses on the positive futures that are being, the positive future that's being created by so many people. And it's a great counterpoint to what we so often hear in the news. Well, he introduces the systems framework. He calls it the adaptive cycle, which isn't all that fascinating to me. I think I'd like to see a better name for it, but you and I can give it whatever name we want. But it's very helpful, I think, in saying that systems, and in this case, economic system, goes through a cycle. It goes through growth, and then there's a period of time where it's established itself and it seeks to conserve or stabilize. And then there's a period of uncertainty and chaos as the system begins to weaken and decline. And so it's a time of release. We have to let go, which of course is a huge challenge right now, as lots of people are clinging to what's been. It's finding it very hard to release. Others are releasing very wonderfully and powerfully and are free, therefore, to move into the stage of regeneration when the system undergoes a fundamental reordering. Everything is different. Nothing is as it was. So here's another little picture of it. Growing, that's what that word is, blanked out by the blue. Conserving, releasing, and regenerating. Now, I find this very useful, because what this does for me, at least, is it locates where we are right now. And there's all the things we're bombarded with. I just, well, how do we put a framework around it? And I find it very useful.
Are you sharing your screen?
Thank you.
You're sharing your screen with us. We're not seeing any screen sharing.
You're not seeing, that's a bummer.
Do you know how to use the screen share?
Yeah, I do, but I forgot a very simple step. Okay, thank you for interrupting me to say that.
Yeah, on the bottom of your screen, there should be a share screen button.
There
we go.
Yeah,
There you go. Thank you.
But it's not the screen I want to share. I don't think.
Oh.
There, that's the one I want to share.
Yeah.
It's not a beautiful sharing job, but it'll do. So there's the cycle of systems: the growing, the conserving, the releasing, the regenerating. So we're really in this phase right here. The global capital system of growth cannot continue anymore. We've exhausted the resources of the planet to use that model any longer. Arguably, it's done some good, but to understand that these systems go through cycles makes us understand that just because there was some good in the past doesn't mean that it can be held on to forever, that can be conserved and held on to, clung to, but rather it's time to move into a different model, and so we need to release from it so that we are free to do the regenerating. And here's where I really feel that voices of faith have a lot to say in this decade of the 2020s, in the releasing and the regenerating. Okay, so let me see. I want to get back to where I see your faces, not just the screen. Okay, stop, share. There we go. That works for me. It probably didn't make any difference for the rest of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, this pandemic has really helped us step much more deeply into the release phase. I mean, it's coercive for some people, and we see the incredible desire for some people to cling to what's been and to insist that it can still be what was normal and we can go back to it. And so we hear lots of that. But if we listen to the other voices, and in many cases, as I was listening to all of you, I listened to your voices, they're the voices that are ready to do the new and have already released from it and are working at the new structures. There's just so many of us, so many of us. It's hard to get a narrative, a major narrative in the media, but there are so many of us, and in that we take courage and we build solidarity through meetings like we're in right now. And Arundhati Roy is one that you may be familiar with in many ways. Some of you perhaps met her, I have not. But a quote from her that's very relevant is, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It's a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. And this connects me to the word apocalyptic that I used in the description. In popular culture, apocalyptic is all about dramatic and horrible breakdown. But the word at its base means revelation. And so basically what it is, it's the breakdown that leads to the breakthrough to the new. It's the terrible unraveling and painful unraveling of the old and all the powers that cling to the old and try to enforce it because, of course, they've benefited so much from it. But nonetheless, the systems do move on. They finally can't control it. And so there is release, there's coercive or by choice, and it's a spiritual transformation. And then we get to a regenerative time. So, it's really the language of metanoia, the changing of the worldview, the conversion, the transformation, and the moving into the new creation. Now, for me, where we are as people of faith is the great need to talk about the Jubilee economy. Now, should I keep talking or should I pause as I move to the third topic and allow time for a little interaction?
We usually do a Q&A period after our speaker reaches a kind of ending point. If you want to intersperse, if you're more comfortable that way, we can certainly accommodate your preference.
Well, I'm a little mixed. A few minutes of interaction right now could be helpful to me because some of you are
And-
very
and-
familiar with some of these things, and you have your own ways of talking about them, and I'd be glad to hear from
You-
2 or 3 of you.
Give me
Lee-
one of these when you need to crack the whip and turn off the Q&A. And Stephen, yes.
Lee, let me suggest something. We have a very active, loquacious group. We are very eager. We've invited you and Angelica here to fully understand and hear your perspective. So I'd encourage you both to do that, and then we will have an active Q&A, I'm sure.
I
Beautifully
totally
said, Stephen.
agree.
I understand.
Yes. Please,
Okay.
Lee, just continue. I agree with
All right.
what Steve said.
So then the third part of the 4 major segments that I have is on the Jubilee economy. Because as I look at this cycle, it's the opportunity now for the Jubilee economy. I don't know if what your experience is with this, but I've been laughed at many times by people who say, Lee, Jubilee was never even practiced. You know, why are you trying to talk about that in modern times? And or if it was practiced, it was abandoned because it didn't work, and so on. Well, that's a misreading. But rather than debate whether Jubilee was practiced or not, the point that I think is important is to learn to read. I'm going to say the Bible. I know that's not the primary sacred text for everyone in this group, but to learn sacred texts economically, to recognize the economics there. This is that people who use the Bible in their liturgies and in their studies aren't really typically trained to do. So it's sort of a novelty for many. But to read the Bible economically, to see the economics of it is quite an astonishing thing. And that's how the Jubilee economy fits in here. Now, the name, of course, comes from the Bible, but it's more than just a year in the Bible. It's really the name for a whole worldview. And it's a worldview that precedes the Bible. It's active in the biblical narratives, and it continues to the present, even though it's not today the dominant worldview. It's present everywhere. So this worldview is akin to what indigenous people have called the original instructions. Now, if we take strictly the biblical text, okay, come on now. Am I going to do it or not? There I am. Okay, so there aren't a lot of texts for Jubilee. So people who tend to read the Bible from a textual perspective will say, well, gee, it's kind of hard to find the texts that are really critical. On the other hand, these particular texts do cover a millennium of time and are by many different authors. So it's not to be poo-pooed. And also this particular passage right here, forget, is really Jesus, the announcement of Jesus, at least as Luke presents him, that he is going to live the Jubilee. He's going to proclaim it, and he's going to live it. And so people who are concerned that it was never practiced forget that Jesus's message was so profoundly economic. And it's not just about being ethical, but it's a profound economic message that he has. So let's see, I'm going to stop share and get back to your faces. This worldview of Jubilee, I call it Jubilee. You can call it Sabbath, you can call it One Earth, you can call it all kinds of things, creation-based economics. I've just come to use the word Jubilee for it. It resists monarchies and empires and superpowers and their economies, and it also gives an alternative to it. In many ways, it practices resistance by practicing the alternative. This worldview is rooted in creation, not in corporate structures. So at least when I look at the world today, I think so much is rooted in corporate structures, and corporations trump creation all the time. But the world is rooted in the organic structures of creation. The worldview is anchored there. Now, I'd like to contrast a little bit those two worldviews, and just to give a little better picture of how I understand the biblical Jubilee. Oops, wrong book. I have one here. I did this thinking through this several years ago, and put it in this book, Blinded by Progress. So in this, I contrast two worldviews that in this book I'm calling the multi-earth worldview and then the one earth worldview. Multi-earth worldview being, I think the name as it suggests, is that it takes more than one planet if everyone were to live that economy and that worldview. So we have only one planet, of course, so it's an unsustainable worldview. This is not new to us, but I want to make the contrasts a little bit more explicit. So in the Jubilee worldview, there's the belief that Earth's great assets generate the greatest well-being when they are stewarded as commons. They are the commonwealth of all species. There's not much emphasis on private ownership, just some. Profits are calculated based on good that's accomplished within ecosystems for the social good and for the well-being of people and all profits. Profits are not maximized for corporate and private benefit. Then there's the sense of abundance that evolves in our consciousness as efforts focus on living within the generous limits of our planet's life-giving productivity. Abundance is the focus again and again. Whereas in the multi-earth world, the sense of scarcity takes over consciousness as everyone competes for Earth's limited resources. Ads urge us toward unlimited accumulation of more, whereas the economics for one Earth living, or the Jubilee economy, recognizes the abundance of enough. Then there's the issue of growth, which in the one Earth economy indicates that health in an economy refers to growth only when it fits within ecosystems of a region, generates a stronger locally integrated economy, and serves the well-being of all people and species. It's a kind of steady state economy with growth and contraction. Whereas, of course, in the multi-earth worldview, contraction is recession, it's depression, it's horrible, we've got to get out of it, we've got to get the economy growing again as fast as we can, because growth is the primary indicator that an economy is healthy. Now, in the One Earth worldview, economic structures designed for money to flow through local enterprises to foster a strong local economy. In the multi-earth worldview, economic structures are designed for export, import, flow of money as managed by non-local, large and multinational corporations and banks. And then there's debt, which in the One Earth worldview helps a community only if it's structured for the short term. I think we're familiar with the passage in Deuteronomy, or some of us are at least, that debt is to be structured for no more than 7 years. Longer terms quickly shape wealth hierarchies and they undermine community. Economic growth must not be linked to debt, but right now we have a debt economy because the only way we can bring money into the economy is through debt, which requires us to continually grow to pay off the debt. Land is sacred and must be held in ways that steward it as commonwealth for all life. Primary decisions regarding it are made by community structures with a view that includes generations to come. By the way, it was fascinating to me when Eleanor Ostrom, the first woman to ever get a Nobel Prize for economics, was also got that prize for her work on the fact that commons work. She undermined the idea of Garrett Hardin of the tragedy of the commons that says they never work because people are basically greedy, and sooner or later someone messes them up. So land is sacred. It's too powerful an instrument to be treated as just real estate. It's a very different point of view. As the Bible says, the earth is the Lord's. It's sacred. It's too powerful for humans to handle. Distribution of wealth moves through and throughout local regions as power purposefully remains decentralized and cooperative, very different from what we're accustomed to. Sharing, giving, cooperative holding, and stewarding wealth of the commons are core economic activities shaping the lives of people and driving the economy. So those give you my definition of what a Jubilee economy is. It's a one earth economy. It's creation-based. It's earth-size, not super-size. I think it's livable today. I don't have any doubt about that it's doable, at least to a considerable degree. And as more and more of us find ways of release in the cycle, economic cycle from the growth to conserving to release, more of us find ways to release, we will be able to regenerate the kind of economy that comes a whole lot closer to the model that includes the elements that I've just described. Now I want to change. Let's see, it's 8:45. Okay, this is a good time. I'd like to shift to action. So just to emphasize again, I believe that faith communities need to talk bravely and boldly about an economic model. I don't have any doubt that the sacred text of the Bible is the proponent of one economic model. By the way, I want to say a word about that. It has two economic models. It has the one that monarchies love, and it has the one that the people of the land love. And the people of the land and monarchies are more or less in conflict throughout the narrative of the Bible. So just as we have today, those two worldviews in tension and in contrast, and in fact aggressively, the multi-earth worldview is very aggressive in the way it tries to dominate and exclude the one earth worldview. That's again true in the scriptures. And so in that sense, if we understand it that way, we see that it's a very powerful read on today's economic and social realities. Okay, so getting then to action. So we need to proclaim the message of an alternative economics and do it bravely. We need to then define what the discipleship or what the spiritual practices are like to actually practice it. And then that's what I want to turn to next. And there's one particular quote. I'm not a fan of Milton Friedman, but let's see if I can do one more share here. Okay, here we go. Milton Friedman I imagine the name is familiar to most of you. A real leader in the Chicago School of Economics. In times past, that School of Economics no longer is even the dominant one in the University of Chicago, as I understand it. But he said in his brief introduction to a reprint of his book, Capitalism and Freedom, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. So we're in that kind of a moment right now, I think, where so many times we thought, well, we're just in a losing battle here. But what before was impossible has now become inevitable. Now, of course, for Friedman, that meant he was going to, if he just kept working and worked with people on a neoliberal globalization type of economy, that's what he was aiming to do. So I want to use this quote to do exactly the opposite kind of economy, but I think it has merit and applies to our moment right now as well. What do we do in Jubilee Economics Ministries? You know, we're such a small organization, and we have these bold ideas, and we do find ways to actually create little models of what's going on. And like many of you do, I know, I hear from what you're doing, you create little practices, and you make them as strong as possible. And we live in the faith that these are good, we test them, these are good for humanity, these are good for the well-being of all of creation, all species. And so this is exactly what we do in Jubilee Economics Ministries. And my colleague, Dan Swanson, whom Grace referred to as a student of hers earlier, and then he went to Mexico and married Angelica. And Angelica's a physician there, but she's also quite a good artist. And so she came into the whole vision of Jubilee through Dan, and has been a deep advocate. Even Dan was just in such a, well, so tragic and such a loss when he died at a much too young age of a heart attack in December a few years ago. But Angelica and the people that came into the Jubilee ministry, both in San Mateo and San Cristobal, said, you know, well, we're not doing this because of Dan Swanson. We're doing this because we're called by God to do it. So they wanted to continue in every way they could. And so it's been the mission of 3 circles: San Diego, San Mateo, San Cristobal. We got lots of sands. And together we are doing our very best and doing quite wonderfully at times in creating an alternative economic model that brings people in. So Angelica, I'd like you to share with us the story of Artesanas Shalom. And this is a story that includes Grace Sternis, actually. But Angelica, yeah, take a few minutes here to tell us the story of Artesanas Shalom, if you would, please.
Yes, of course. I'm going to try to speak English, but if you don't understand me, I'm going to ask Grace to translate for me, please. I represent the women's group called Artesana Shalom that started on March 2017 after a visit of Grace Dearness, who inspired us when she shared with us some testimonies about how women in different parts of the world could unite and work together. In the beginning, we were about 20 women, and the first year, we learned from others to make different kinds of crafts. We invest in some classes, tutorials, and others, and we could learn about knitting, about balloon techniques, about decoration, painting, embroidery, etc. The second year was our year because we could put into practice all what we learned. We went to houses to decorate and went to sell our products to different spaces in our town and also in the closed city called Tecamachalco. Our plan for this year was to start our own store to sell our crafts, but the pandemic started and that caused a lot of disappointment in us. Our plans changed. Some women were so disappointed and struggling with their economy because some of their husbands lost their jobs. Then we decided to start making masks. Some of them very pretty like this. This is needed. And for kids, this, this one. And it helped a lot. One of the women started making a lot of this, and they could survive selling the masks during that critical point. For example, Lucy is one of our artisans. His husband works in construction and no jobs for him were. And she, for 3 weeks, she was selling the masks until he could get a job. And this time, we have also a savings bank. We save every week about $1 to $25. In pesos is 20 pesos to 500 pesos. And this has been very important, and especially because we also lend money with a very low interest. At the end of the year, we can share the interests we can have, and that helps a lot. And so we are very, very grateful with Grace to come here and help us to start something that it is helpful for our community. I don't know if you understood. If not, let me know, please. God bless you.
Thank you, Angelica. I wonder if I could just add something, Lee. Because when I went to San Mateo, I was just going to see what I could learn. And they invited me to meet with a group of women. And as we were in a circle and were talking, it became quite evident that these women felt trapped. They were trapped in their homes. They were trapped by abusive relationships. They were trapped by any number of things. And so out of that conversation, which they had not shared a lot to each other before that, as I understand, they created this idea of let's work together and do something different and release ourselves to not be dependent on, you know, the issues that were keeping them oppressed. And so I think has nothing to do with me, Angelica. It's them feeling the release and the moment to be able to think creatively and say another way is possible. I think that's the key that has happened, and look at the results. So that's fantastic. And even people are asking in the chat how they can buy the masks. So, you know, we never know how this will continue. But go ahead, Lee. Sorry for that brief.
Not at all. I think it's helpful to have multiple perspectives, because like Angelica is so in the middle of it, she could, you know, it's like each of us, we forget how other people recognize what we're doing, and so their comments add value. So Angelica, you know, Atrasane Shalom is a wonderful example of the empowerment of women, the doing justice where enormous injustices were shaping their lives, and Artisana Shalom is bringing more justice into their lives. And as I understand it, the business is a cooperative, which is a very wonderful model. Do you want to say anything about that, Angelica?
Yes, it is a cooperative business, and we can sell together and share. And it is a fantastic group because we know each other, we can trust each other. And at the beginning, we were 20 very active, but now we are less. We are 13 very active. And in our savings bank are 28 women who are friends of us or people close to us. But yes, it is a community group, and we have been able to be in the town, showing our crafts and telling them that it is possible to work in community, even though we have differences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to conclude now then with this last segment by referring to the One Earth Jubilee Covenant for the 2020s. Recently, we have put together a number of our practices that we've been developing over years. How do we practice this alternative economy within the context of this dominating, aggressive economy of growth and power? And of course, we do it imperfectly. But what key practices can we do now? What's important to me to say is that in our understanding of these practices are discipleship. They're spiritual practices. And so we make them as a way of following our path of faith. Now, let's see, I'm going to share one more screen here with you. So these are the elements in the covenant. The covenant itself describes each of these, and if you go to this website, you'll see the complete description of them. But we've launched the 2020s, or in the 2020s, we've launched this with an invitation for people to sign the covenant, to show that we're in solidarity on doing this. And there are 8 items here. There probably could be 15 easily, but there are 8. So let me just run through them with you. What we're thinking about each one. Banking. It's a spiritual practice to choose our bank. In a finance world, mega banks finance ecologically destructive projects, and they're protected from failing. So we need to use a local bank. So the covenant says I will use a local bank, a credit union, or a community development financial institution for my transactions. This is really important. When we make a deposit at, say, Wells Fargo or any of the mega banks, Citibank, Chase, money talks, and we can do that. Our money can say things, but once we deposit it in a bank, the mute button is hit on our voice, and the money no longer says what we want it to say. It now says what the bank wants it to say. And that's a very powerful reminder for us as to which bank we choose for our organizations, for any congregations we're part of, for our personal finance, and the same is true for investing. Actually, I ran some of these ideas on banking past the former president of Iberia Bank in Louisiana, and I said, "What should I modify, Pat?" And he said, wrote back and he said, "Don't modify a thing. Everything you're saying is right on." That's always reassuring, isn't it, to have someone who's in the field say that kind of thing? Then the next thing is cooperative. So in a global economy shaped by transnational corporations, I will shape my life around cooperatives and local businesses as much as possible. We just need to go out of our way to identify any cooperatives in our local community and support them, to participate in them. It's just a very important step of discipleship. Cooperatives are much more inclined to be interested in the commons and the well-being of people. Eating. In a global unstable industrial food supply system, and that's being exposed all the time now, this covenant says, I will buy from the most local suppliers, from local growers, from farmers markets, and grow some of what I eat. I will eat a largely plant-based diet, low meat, avoid sodas, and drink clean water and regional beverages. Well, given the comments we heard earlier, we can see that that's a huge challenge for some people. But eating is an incredible portal to a different worldview. So it's not just about what's healthy eating, it's about how do we change the worldview with our choices in eating. And then over-consuming. Given that the growth economy depends on over-consuming, I will learn the joy of living with what I perceive to be a just and fair share of what Earth supplies. Footprint. Given that 2030 is the date by which our lives and societies need to be reshaped to fit our planet, I will calculate the ecological footprint of my household through an online calculator, such as Nature Conservancy or Global Ecological Footprint, and take every step I can to reduce its size to fit our one planet. Recognizing we are part of nature, I will offset the impact of my household and participate in tree planting projects and other projects that ally with nature's resilient ways. Then there's debt. Given that money enters the economy through bank loans, meaning debt, I will use no more than 2 credit cards and pay them off each month. Some people would probably be glad if they could have 1 credit card. Debt owed me that cannot be paid, I will forgive after no more than 7 years. If possible, I will join or help form a local chapter of a debt forgiving organization such as Debt Collective. Investing. If I have investments, I will withdraw funds from fossil fuel entities and all others that are engaged in injustices. Justice giving. I will plan to give of my financial resources to causes that honor creation's ways, the work of justice, and the work of One Earth Jubilee. And this is related to us in particular, in the Mexico circles in my hometown. Yeah, justice giving is different than just charity, because in charity, of course, we don't necessarily aim to change the system, but justice giving aims to actually impact systemic change. So that's an important item to consider in our giving. Now, I think maybe I'll just stop with this thought. I saw a sign recently that someone was carrying in one of the protests that said, "The system is not broken. It was designed this way." And so that to me was an important reframing. We've learned a lot, I think, in the last couple months of how our systems are designed for white supremacy, how they're designed for racial injustice, how they're designed for economic injustice, for food injustice. So the systems are designed that way. So we need to be released from these systems, and we need to regenerate the new systems, the new heaven, the new earth, and we can do it. I mean, we have the message, we have definable actions, and we can claim them and move into them. So I'm going to stop. I think most of you are still here. My gosh, I don't know. That's pretty impressive. And so however we proceed, let's do that next.
I think that would be time for Q&A. First, thank you so much for your presentation, and Angelica also. For those of you who are comfortable with the raise hand function on Zoom, that would be the most orderly fashion to do things. I will also keep scrolling and try to catch people as we go and follow a stack. So who's going to raise their hand first for questions? Oh, don't be shy.
I raised my hand already, Robert.
Sorry, is that Ignacio?
Yes.
So I got Ignacio, shoot, I see Phil.
I'll try to monitor that for you, Robert. Yes. Ignacio.
Thank you. I'm trying to keep a stack. I've got Ignacio and Phil so far. I don't see the raised hands on Zoom. I just realized because I'm not co-host. So.
Oh yeah, you have to look at it through the list. So I'll keep an eye on that.
Okay.
Ignacio.
Oh.
Yes. Thank you so much. And I think you already said that or stated the limitation of using Jubilee economics, and that is that it is too religious, and we're in a very secularized society. I think your creation-based or creation-friendly economics probably would work better with most groups. But I don't want to discourage from using Jubilee in church circles. I think that's a wonderful tradition. I just want to say that the Cobb Institute, that list that you had at the very end, could be exactly taken from the Cobb Institute that Louis Chase and I belong to, and that makes me very happy. I don't want to play, we did it first or whatever. John Cobb has been at it since 1969 when he wrote "Is It Too Late?" And now that he, at the ripe old age of 95, has created the Cobb Institute, which he didn't want to name Cobb Institute. We insisted it be named the Cobb Institute. He has been at it for a long, long time and has been surrounded by a lot of people, and he would rejoice in the fact that you and others, independent of his influence, are developing very, very similar ideas. So I'm very, very happy for what you're doing. I'm glad that you're so close to Tecamachalco. My first church ever was in Santa Catarina, Coapiaxtla, just a few kilometers from Tecamachalco, you know, and that's where I preached my first sermon. And before I was ordained a pastor, I was 16 years old. And I think that every possible way of experimenting needs to be encouraged. I just happened to read a statement by a doctor who says, never underestimate the power of someone who is cash poor and time rich. And COVID has made us all time rich. And I think this is a wonderful blessing. You know, I don't think that the COVID itself is a blessing, but those of us who are people of faith can add the blessing. And you are a blessing in what you're doing. And I hope that many of us will just follow that. And I just want to express my gratitude for what you're doing and encourage you to keep on doing it.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad to hear about the Cobb Institute. Yes, of course, I'm familiar with John Cobb and process theology and some of those things. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and hear next from Stephen Fisk. And you're muted, Stephen. Please unmute, Stephen. Your lips move, I cannot hear you. Stephen Fisk, you're still on mute. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it very much. Of course, what we're seeing in the streets now is so much to do with racial injustice and racial inequality. And I find that your covenants did not really discuss that, although probably in justice giving it would be found. But I wish you would expound a little more, and can you, on the issue of race, which is such in our face these days, and we need to really spend time with that.
Yes. Well, I'd just say a couple of things. I think you're quite right that given the context, I mean, this just arose so, I mean, it's been there all the time, but it just arose so powerfully and wonderfully through the murder and it's almost become martyrdom of George Floyd. But of course, he's the icon for hundreds and hundreds of others. And it's exposed the injustices in racial communities. I mean, what happens in our schools because of it, what happens, communities of color have harder, terrible environmental issues, hard issues to get any loans, to get anything entrepreneurial. I was greatly heartened. Was it in this last week, Asheville, North Carolina, their city council passed a reparations resolution 7-0. And they now are going to be working on the reparations for the African-American people of their community. So yes, I think the idea of putting it into the covenant is a good idea. And might say this too, that in the US, the strongest invocation of Jubilee has come from the Black community. A lot of the Black community has forgotten that to be true, but it was especially strong in the era of slavery, and then as the movement of abolition. And we might also remember that there's a biblical text on the Liberty Bell, which is maybe the most explicit Jubilee text. Proclaim liberty or Jubilee throughout the land to all the inhabitants. And it was really through the efforts of Quakers Anthony and others, that this bell became, the U.S. Liberty Bell, but also through the abolitionists. They really raised it up. And they were so aware of the whole issue of Jubilee. So regrettably, when I talk with African-American groups, they don't remember this. It's so lost from the consciousness, but it's there, and it's for us to learn from. But anyway, your point, thank you, Stephen, for emphasizing the importance of that right now. Yeah.
Thank you. Next on my list, I have Phil.
I am here. As you were speaking, I was having kind of a full circle moment, and made some comment in chat about it, and then you basically confirmed my thoughts on it, which is I grew up in the co-op movement. My folks were creators and promoters of all kinds of co-ops, consumer co-ops, living co-ops, educational co-ops, etc. And I never heard anybody previously talking about Jubilee in that context. But it is contextually totally compatible. And that just kind of gave me a feeling that what I was raised with is coming back alive in a manner. And I was wondering if you wanted to comment a little more about the element of cooperatives.
It's worth noting that cooperatives worldwide are growing, significantly growing. I think it's the University of Wisconsin-Madison that has a very good website on cooperatives. And I don't know, I'm not sure of the status in this country, what their growth is, but they're such a powerful alternative in bringing things to those who can't participate in the economy in other ways. Example, and in fact, I never have said this, but the Jubilee economy doesn't work as a dominating economy. You can't dominate people if you practice the creation-based economy. You can cooperate with people, you can share with people, but you can't dominate them. The creation-based economy, Jubilee, is from the bottom up. It's not from the top down. We don't have to wait for the Fed to tell us what's going to happen. So we work from the bottom up. Well, when I was growing up, speaking of growing up with cooperatives, yes, I know that my home was a participant in at least 3 cooperatives that come to mind right away. The most significant, perhaps, was the Rural Electrification Association. Back in the time that this was in the Roosevelt presidency, where he knew that we had to get the rural communities electrified. But corporations said, well, we can't afford it. It costs, it's just not, the bottom line. It doesn't pencil. Well, cooperatives formed, and they figured out how to do it. Corporations couldn't, but cooperatives could figure out how to do that. It's, I think, a wonderful historical example of the power of a cooperative to go into places that corporations can't, and to expose the weakness of corporations out of their profit motive. And corporations, of course, have a whole different set of motives.
We have Bonnie up next, and then Anthony.
So actually, I raised my hand because I thought some woman ought to, and I would like to encourage the other women in this meeting to speak up. But the point I wanted to make is, I think there's kind of, I would call it a dialectical contradiction. You can call it something else if you want. But on the one hand, on the one side is that we need to learn how to be the kind of people and collectives and groups that know how to work cooperatively. We have to learn how to be able to work cooperatively, collectively, in a non-domineering fashion. Otherwise, what kind of hope is there that the whole world could ever be like that? But on the other hand, how can the work we do locally, and in this context, that would be like local co-ops, how can that, how do we get from there to the transformation of the global system? So I posted that in chat, and Ignacio said one project at a time. And as much as I love Ignacio, I can't see that working, because there is this thing that Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, and whatever we want to call it now, and it's hell-bent on preserving itself. It's, you know, we've got so much else on our plate, we're not really thinking that much about war, but the escalating conflicts between the US and China, among others, you know, mean that soon could become a reality we can't ignore. And so I think this question of how we transition from working locally to transforming globally is something that I think is key. It's kind of crux. I don't think that's an easy one.
Just a couple comments about that. One is on your earlier comment about working cooperatively. I want to remind us all that we're hardwired to work cooperatively. Our primary wiring is not to work competitively. And Fritjof Capra, I know, it reminded me so powerfully of this a few years ago when I heard him speak. He said, I want to bring you up to date on the primary discovery in the life sciences in the last 20 years. That was 10 years ago. So he said, we've learned that the primary dynamic in creation, he probably said nature, is cooperation. The primary dynamic in evolution is cooperation, not competition like we've been taught. Now, this is really transformative when we understand ourselves this way, because the dominant multi-earth system does not proclaim a human nature that does that. In the multi-earth system, human nature is selfish, it's calculating, it's always wants more, it is wired for greed, those kinds of things. So when we have a system that draws on, and if we do this in our faith communities, just repeatedly say, but you know, our structures, we believe our structures are for cooperation and for sharing. And of course, we need an economy that rewards that. Rian Eisler, in her book, The Real Wealth of Nations, talks about an economy that measures, monetizes caring and sharing. Because right now, most of the caring and sharing that happens in our community does not get monetized. And therefore, it's not measured in the economy. So that's a really important thing for us to remember, that this is the way, you know, God made us, if you will, to be our design is that we are people to cooperate, that we are communitarian, we are social, we are wanting to share. And then the other thing to say is, you know, how are we going to move from local to global? One of the things we need to remember, the answer is beyond me, I suspect all of us, but one of the things to remember is that the powers of the cosmos. I mean, we did not begin 2020 thinking we were going to have a pandemic that stopped everything in its tracks. None of us planned it. None of our organizations engineered it. It happened. Now, it happened through the tragic mistakes of the multi-earth economy, which keeps pushing into habitats where it doesn't belong. That isn't quite the right to say it, but it's into habitats that show the incredible imbalance of overconsumption. It just throws the whole ecosystem out of balance. And so we get a virus from an animal, and that's not the last one. You know, if we keep in this behavior, we can just expect that the earth demands balance in time. It does not allow imbalances to persist. So this is a really important thing, and this is the way the cosmos functions. And we need to remember that we aren't alone in this thing. We have a benevolent cosmos that helps unjust systems unravel. They have the seed of their own destruction in them, even though it doesn't look like it a lot of the time. And the cycles of system falling, you know, takes a long time, more than one lifetime in many cases. But we're in that phase right now in our lifetime, in these years. So I think we need to remember that we aren't the ones who are going to have to figure out how to do something globally. Around the globe, there are all kinds of caring, sharing people. And if the system that now dictates how they shall live unravels, all of these things will spring up. And these things that seem impossible will become inevitable. That's sort of my declaration of faith. Maybe that's a good place to end.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Lee, I want to thank you for your vision and your work, and also convey greetings from Jill. We're close friends with the Kinslers, and they've been a huge influence on us. One thing that I just wanted to bring up that hasn't really been stressed, I think, enough is that the biblical view of land is that we don't own it. It ultimately belongs to God or the Creator. We're stewards of the land. We have responsibility. And that's very different from the Roman view of land, which is a sovereign ownership. So I just want to lift up community land trusts as an example of how this biblical principle has been put into practice. It was sort of initiated by the African American community in Georgia, as you probably know. And I just wonder if this is part of your thinking about land, and this is also an indigenous idea that the land cannot be owned by the people.
And I mentioned it in the covenant, and I referred to Eleanor Ostrom, the first woman economist to get a Nobel Prize, who got the prize by showing that cooperatives, the common holding of land works, unlike what capitalism would have us believe. By the way, avoid socialism and capitalism. They're both growth economies. Forget it. We got to have no growth economies. Just those discussions are traps. So anyway, yes, what you say about the CLT, I've been on the board of the Community Land Trust in San Diego for a number of years, and you know, it's not publicly held land. It's not privately held land. It's communally held land. And that's a very, very powerful implementation, I think, of stewarding creation.
Mine is just a comment. Lee, thank you so very, very much for that very good presentation and options open to us through the covenant and thinking about it. I think we've had some rich chat interactions as well, and I've copied the chat already, downloaded it. And Angelica too, for just your amazing work of cooperative learning together there in San Mateo, as well as the people that you work with in San Cristobal de las Casas. My comment is actually just brief. A few years ago, a PhD student of mine wanted to do her project on cooperatives. She's from Detroit, and you know, her family is really losing out in that whole economic situation many years back, and Detroit has been so depressed because of that. So she wanted to work on that, and she wanted to work on cooperatives. So that became her project. And we discovered in the process, because I owe it to her, that there are so many regulations against cooperatives in this country that it makes many types of cooperatives illegal in this country. And so here you have again a structure that goes against this one earth economy.
Yes.
You know, and that is where we constantly hit the rub. The structures are not for one earth, and we need to start really dismantling and changing and beginning regenerating anew. So you've stimulated us to think about this more, and we will continue. That was my comment.
Mine is like a comment and kind of this is a comment. I have come from two economic mother and father, and I never have heard this perspective, and it really opened my eyes to the value of local farmers markets and the value that we place in our cooperatives, and the high amounts of value that we should have, and that we should support them, even if we don't buy anything. Just go and show your face and meet your friends there, because it's a meeting place. It's a place where we can network and share ideas. And I just so appreciate this. I see you, JP, Darren, Stephen, everybody. I just so appreciate this, Robert and Lee. This is so enlightening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm very heartened by this whole time together. Very heartened. I'm very moved by it, really. Okay, so just one more thing that I'd like to say, Grace. You said you copied the chats. I sure would love to see them. I see that there are 70 chats at this point. And yeah, if there's any link or anything that I shared that you didn't have time to connect to, let me know, and I'll yeah, it would be an honor to in any way work with any of you that on the smallest of things. So thank you.